Now, so we've got this person, right? That often we have to also recognize that, you know, often violation follows a person through adulthood. I used to say I felt like I had a smell, right? That people would just know that they could do that, right? And, you know, so that violation often follows people through unless they take charge of it and they become sex workers or something like that. Spectrum is interesting, right? So as we're working with somebody, recognizing and understanding, like if somebody's talking about sexual violation in their adulthood, right? We're going to ask that question. Do you have any recollection of any earlier trauma in your lifetime? Right? And, you know, again, with that complexity, we've got a person who is on the spectrum of being a sex addict to being like, doesn't want to be touched at all. You know, relationships are completely upside down, and, you know, they're very used to being, you know, coerced and manipulated. Yeah. And, you know, suddenly they're trying to be a wife or a husband or a mom and dad, right? And often, like magnets or like infections, they attract each other, right? So that combination is a recipe for disaster, right? You know, and I think often I've had many people that I have trained that say, well, I don't want to work with sexual trauma. And I'm like, well, why are you working with trauma? What are you going to do with that? Right? If you're not going to recognize that that is the deepest, biggest trauma that people have, and it's 1 in 3 people, 1 in 5 people. You've got 10 women in the room, there are 3 of them that have been violated at least, right? So we have to recognize that, right? And understand that no matter what our angle is that we're working, right? If the marriage isn't working, then, you know, are they traumatized around why? Like, are they trying to figure that out? I think there's a lot of things that factor into things not working. Yeah. Now, as a practitioner, you know, even though like you may know it in your core, like it's not something that we should ever insert, right? Because it is the biggest fraction that can happen, right? And, you know, so much can be dumped open, or so much pain can be triggered, right? If you're not right, you know what I mean? So
don't make any assumptions. Don't
never,
interpose. Just don't go there
don't go there, right?
unless they bring it up.
I had a woman that like I knew it the first time I met her, and I probably worked with her for 6 months before she said, you know, I'm wondering if my dad molested me. Right. And I'm like, you know, at that point, I was like, well, that's something that's been on my mind. Would you like to explore that? Right. You know, Paula, which you'll be able to see in the videos, like she would just like, you know, be telling a story and then just almost like an Alzheimer's person. Like just clear as day it would come out. I think Papa molested me, and then like she'd pick up where she left off here. So it was definitely like her subconscious throwing that up. But then she wouldn't even recognize she said it, right? And that went on for months and months, right? before she was ready to know who that was. That
Right.
was sneaking in her bed, right? Right now, we've got psychics that are telling people that they're molested all the time. They're telling people who they're molested by, and it's really, really unethical, right? Really unethical, right? Now, what happens often, the way these memories and stuff start coming back, right? They start coming back when you're desperately in need of the information, right? So pregnancy is huge for flashback time and memory flooding in, right? Because you're getting ready to walk that game, right? Often, the closer it is in, the longer it takes, right? So if a person had been violated by numerous people, like they're gonna remember the extraneous ones, and the closer you get into daddy or something, they're often well into their 40s. Like I was very clear about my uncle and my dad's friend. Very clear. Like, and I was probably 45 before, I let myself register that that was true with him as well. And that happens so often because, to really internalize the truth of that, how can you ever play the same game again with these people, right? It like forever changes everything potentially, right? Because you're not going to suddenly just be going to Christmas, or you're not going to be, right? Like it's going to be a complete earth shake to recognize that everything that you possibly thought to be true is not, right? All the people, right? It starts because once you get that close in, then the recognition of the parts that everyone played in that, right? Like, it's a very difficult place to reconcile unless these people are in a space, I've walked through with numerous people, and to be able to say, okay, in this year, we took this explosion of release of this information and this family that went like this, and today they're all over here together and the abuser's over here rather than everybody being over here. You know what I mean? Because often siblings, parents, they get very mad at the victim. Why are you blowing up like that? Why are you doing this, right? And it turns to, a complete reversal of what makes sense. Right? Why would you ruin his name? Why would you? Right? So in that, right, as I'm walking through adults trying to reconcile family and what all that means, right, we have to recognize that this is a shake all the way to the core of their being when they start really reconciling the truth of that. Now, what's also real and true is that, the sexual trauma stopped a long time ago. The abuse that follows that is horrific, right? Potentially. right? The family members that are trying to keep it hidden and, you know, intentionally turning the truth around and hiding things and hiding information and blah, 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 right? Like the abuse that happens after that is far worse than the actual event, right? That's the complexity of it. It never stops. Yeah, it never stops. And I think that is a piece that, you know, is something just stepping in and going, you know, I don't know how many people like you hear, can't you just get over it and put that behind you? And it's like, it's not about what happened behind me. It's about what the folks are doing today. Right? And that has nothing to do with my dad. You know what I mean? Often that is true, right? That the biggest amount of abuse happens on the back end of that. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
You know, so when a person is trying to figure out how to navigate creating their future, you know, they need somebody standing by their side and saying, okay, like, you know, it is not okay that that person is doing this. Like, here's a way you can respond, right? I mean, oftentimes I've got clients like sending me entire like texts, emails, like, and we're creating a response, right? That is holding them accountable without a fight, right? This can have people swimming in a puddle of bacteria forever. Why would he do that? And it's like, honey, if you could understand why he'd do that, then you would do it too. So let's just be grateful that you can't understand that. That was a very sick, craving choice, and he should not have done that. Yeah. But the why, you know, now the why is also of like what the parents, like what everybody did after. Why didn't mom stop him? Right? Why was she always running to my rescue and nothing ever changed? Why would she look at me knowing that he was doing that and say little girls need their daddies? Moms play huge roles in these situations, right? And, you know, the life that is lost often to childhood sexual trauma, right, is that's a sin, right? That's a sin. That one person's 5 seconds of gratification, right, would cause this. Now, again, back to that measuring stick. If an adult man were to put his penis inside of a child, she is going to tear. A child's vagina opens to about that wide, right? Period, stretched as big as it will be. And a man's penis, right, is usually about 3 inches in diameter, right? It's impossible, right? So that measuring stick is so freaking stupid. It doesn't even make sense. If a child is actually raped with a penis inside of her, there will be bruising, there will be tearing, there will be bleeding. She'll likely struggle to have children, right? That's going to tear her up. She is a little tiny child. Yeah. So for an adult to put those parameters on these experiences is, I don't know, it just doesn't make sense at all. It's just really stupid, right? You know, most often those interactions are touching. Many, many times they get the child to touch them. That's very titillating to get the child to touch them or put their mouth on their penis, right? Or, you know, they'll touch the child, right? But very often they get the child to do something to them, right? So again, with the mind fuck, right? Like then they can say, but you were the one that did it. I didn't do anything to you. Right? You liked that. You liked touching me, right? Like, and then that game for a kid. So when an adult is moving through this, the shoulds, woulds, coulds, right? We have to really catch them on those and negate them from vocabulary. Shoulds, woulds, coulds, right? You know, they're going to go, you know, and they're actually, once it opens, they're going to go through a grief process around that, right? Because their childhood truly was robbed, right? Like that man robbed their childhood, right? So, you know, they're going to go through a grieving process, you know, because the adult truly has to, like, their stories and the child's stories have to catch up, right? Like, because the child is screaming, this is happening to me. And another thing is kids often feel like they're telling you because their behaviors, right, are usually very erratic, right? The masturbation, you know, I've had clients that are like, oh yeah, my dad, like, you know, everybody was making fun of me because I was masturbating all the time, right? Where it becomes the family joke and you're the butt of it, right? You know, so yeah, the big piece of this is the adult story and the child story have to meld as you're bringing this unity together, right? And the adult will go through a period of, I mean, it is interesting, almost internally when time shifts to that degree, right? And the mental processes have to shift to that degree. It is a huge energetic, almost a blankness, I guess, as that's happening, because dots are connecting, like, you know, memories are popping in, right? And that adult is in rapid fire transition at that point, right? So we are being aware of crisis moments during that, right? Because time, you know, their entire story has to shift and change to incorporate this new information. On an external, as an external example, when I wrote Junebug, you know, years ago, they sent it back to me after the first edit and they're like, the timeline doesn't make sense. I thought I was going to have a nervous breakdown. Like, it was absolutely, like, on every level of my existence, like a car crash, right? I was like, what do you mean it doesn't make sense? This is my story, right? And then, you know, my oldest daughter sat with me and she goes, Mom, like, it doesn't make sense that you'd be this age here and that age there. Like, you know, we started moving that around and it was truly like my guts were being turned upside down and moved to new spots. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the drasticness of that, everything finding order in the timeline. So, you know, this clash between reality and this life that was built on all these stories, you know, comes colliding. right? And then the division, like how do you cross that boundary back in? When you know people are holding true to lies, what do you do about that? You know, how do you say, okay, this is